Good morning, everyone. I am Vera from the European Journalism Center, and it is my pleasure to welcome you all to the second day of our News Impact Summit about all things data. We had a great start yesterday discussing how COVID 19 brought along challenges, but also, oh, here we go. Sorry, the production was telling me I needed my microphone. Thank you for that, guys. So I was saying, we had a great start yesterday discussing how COVID 19 brought along challenges, but also opportunities and solutions in the way we report with data. And we learned how important open source and data driven reporting can be when it comes to holding power into account. We had a fantastic lineup, and we had all of you joining from that side over there and making our live chat very active and interesting with your questions and comments. Thank you very much for your participation. Joining me today is Ana Salinas, also from our events and training team at the EJC. Hi, Anna.
Hi.
And our graphic reporter, Sally Pring, is also back for round two. Let's see what Sally is doing today in her drawings. Let's take a peek.
Hey Vera, nice to be back, and not a lot to see right now, but
oh, sorry for that. I think I put you on the line there, Sally, for a moment. No worries at all. We're looking forward. We'll be coming back to take a look at your work. So we look forward to seeing the second day of NIS data taking shape.
Me too. Thank you.
Very good. As usual, our colleague Angela Pontes Rodriguez, also from the EJC, and who many of you met yesterday, is going to be interacting with you in the live chat. And now, yes, buenos dias, Ana. How are you today?
Buenos dias. Hello, everyone. I'm very happy and excited to be joining the second day of the summit from the studio today. And before we start the sessions, what if we warm up our live chat? As always, we would love to know, where are you joining us from today? How are you feeling this second day? And we have a question for you. What made you fall in love or out of love with data journalism? Vera, I know that you are not a data journalist, but I have a question. Would you like to become one, or maybe have worked as one?
Well, it's I see data journalism as a different area within journalism. So I believe I had some contact with it, even though indeed it's not my thing, and I'm not prepared at the moment to be a data journalist myself. I would have to learn a lot, I feel. To become a data journalist. There's an entire understanding around statistics, numbers, percentages that, yes, I would have to dig deeper into to be able to do it.
And what about you guys? What was the reason that motivated you to go into data journalism? Do you have any reason that you want to share with us? Personally, I would love to work as one, and I believe it's never too late. So I'm very open to learn new things. That's why we are here today. And here we have some comments from our participants. We have Jesus. Hi, he's saying that he's in Luxembourg, and he's doing visualizing tiny data sets. We have Carlo, who is in Brussels, and says that feels in love with fell in love with data visualization because of a colleague that introduced the engine work of Alberto Cairo. We have also people joining from all over the world. We have people from Tbilisi, Paris. We have also here Simona, that says that loves the transparency that arises from using numbers and stats. That's a good one. It's a really good one. So thank you very much for your participation. And I want to remind you that you are welcome to share your comments and your questions in the live chat. Also, don't forget to join our conversations on social media, LinkedIn, Twitter, and Facebook using the hashtag NISData.
Mhm. Thank you so much for that. It's great to see your answers in the live chat over here. And please stay with us because we will be covering a lot of these topics. Transparency, how numbers and stats are fantastic for fact checking and how they can help us regain the trust of the audience. That's why we are here today. I would also like to mention a couple of people talk about Alberto Cairo. So take a look at datajournalism.com. This is also work by the EJC, and you will find a lot of free training in the area of data journalism over there. And some of the courses have the hand of Alberto Cairo. So please take a look at that. Very good. Before we continue, I would like to thank to our sponsor and partner, Google News Initiative, for making this summit and all the summits until today possible, and to all the other organizations who joined us and helped us spread the word about our events online. Thank you so much for your support and enthusiasm. It was really important to bring in so many people to our audience. And finally, a huge thanks to everyone who is already joining today. I see people from Belgium, from Brussels in Belgium, from Italy, from Valencia in Spain, from Tbilisi in Georgia. It's great, really. It's been amazing to see everyone of you gathering in our live chat.
Yeah, no, we're very happy to have people from all around the world. That's why it is important to mention that the News Impact Summits are free events open to everyone, but they are also spaces, inclusive spaces, where we can have open discussions and we can find ways to collaborate. So that's why we're very proud of our good energy, our positive environment, and we created a non-harassment policy to keep this environment. So now our team is sharing our policy in the live chat. Take a look and don't forget to be kind and respectful with your comments and behavior.
Thanks for that, Anna. Very important. So I'd say we are ready to start our program for the day. We will continue discussing how coronavirus has influenced the way of producing data journalism, stories, products, but also projects. So we will also look into data and how important it is to report on social movements and justice. And we will host a panel discussion on the importance of access to information and data, usually held by public bodies. So let's start. Life hasn't been quite the same after COVID-19, and neither has journalism. Back in March, newsrooms were suddenly flooded with stats and numbers, changing data very much, changing all the time, and unreliable data at times. So they needed to understand, to process and translate for their audiences in the most comprehensive way what was this data about. So we'll be taking a look today at the Financial Times trajectory tracker, which started out as a simple graph to help people visualize the rising number of coronavirus cases and deaths per country. Well, as more people found out about the tracker, they went online to ask for data on more countries and for more specific information, which turned it into kind of an internet sensation. So today we are joined by Ben Murdoch, the brain behind this tracker, who will share with us how this data tool captured the attention, the interest, and most importantly, the trust of thousands of followers and brought in new subscribers to FT. So welcome to NIS Data, John.
Thank you, Vera, and thank you, Anna, as well. And good morning, everyone. It's a real sort of privilege to be here with you all. Yeah, so that's right. I'm just going to be talking really about how the work we've done at the FT over the last, well, almost a year now. I think we're on to about 9 months that our pandemic tracker pages have been live. So I'm going to talk about how that came about and why we think it has particularly resonated with our audience and indeed expanded our audience. So really this is about, I think, how data journalism has matured and has certainly become seen as much more valuable by both readers and senior figures in newsrooms during the course of the pandemic. I've been working in data journalism now for about 7 or 8 years, so I personally appreciated the value that data journalism can bring for a long time now, but I think it just has been really apparent how that has cut through to much wider and more senior audiences in 2020. So this is the chart I think that a lot of people will be familiar with. This, as you were saying just then, Vera, is a chart that was initially done actually just as a sort of one-off graphic after one of our news reporters asked me the question back in early March of what do we know about whether other countries are on the same course as Italy. This was at the time when Italy, of course, was in the news headlines on most days with rather tragic scenes as the fatalities piled up in Lombardia. And what we wanted to do really was see if we could answer that question in chart form to show people whether they were on course for seeing similar figures and similar pictures as we were seeing in Italy. And so this was the chart that I produced. And as I say, when we initially made this, we just thought, okay, making charts is what we do at the FT. We'll put this one out there and that will be that. But it turned out that people got a huge amount of value from this. It really resonated and went on to be sort of one of our iconic charts that we updated manually every day, essentially since March. And this is what happened to traffic to our coronavirus tracking page when we added that chart. So we actually published this page on the 9th of February. At that time, it had a couple of maps in there. It was obviously more focused on the Asian region. But what you can see with that black arrow there is when we added this chart and a couple of sort of sister charts, as it were, to the page, focusing more on that reader question, that public question of when will other countries and will other countries at all be on that same path as some of the hardest hit parts of the world. And you can see how traffic to that page really shot up, really rocketed when we included this stuff that was more explicitly answering questions that readers had. The other thing you might notice there is this dark blue area on that chart, which is essentially absent for that first couple of months, but then becomes very large. And that's the amount of traffic coming to our page from social media. So again, I think it really demonstrated how, first of all, answering questions that the readers had explicitly in our charts. And second, going out to the mass audience of social media, particularly Twitter, and really bringing this information, these resources to people directly was hugely valuable. This was obviously a pandemic where millions and millions of people were checking social media and other news sources every day to find out what was going on. And by making sure that our information was in that sort of primary space for them, we were able to get it in front of a far bigger audience than we usually would. The FT obviously has a solid readership at any time, but what was clear with the work we were doing on the pandemic was that it was cutting through and reaching far more people than we typically would. So we also went on to do things like we took the paywall down on this page. You can see that in the latest spike around the 22nd of March, because we really felt it was critical, even as a subscription-based news organization, to get this information in front of as many people as possible. And what we've been doing, this is both stuff that on the data team we've been doing, but also our brilliant audience engagement team has been looking into exactly what data and visual journalism does for the FT and indeed for our readers. And what we've found is that when you consider a concept like engagement, which we're defining here as the length of time our readers spend with a piece of journalism, the distance they're scrolling down the page, how much they're really sort of focusing on the information presented to them. We found that all of the work that we've been doing, which features data and visualizations over the course of this year, has actually got higher engagement by that measure than the work that doesn't feature visual journalism. So including charts and data in stories actually leads readers to spend more time with our work. We're also finding, as I mentioned, as a subscription-based organization, that this really supports our core goal of getting more people to make those visits to the FT more frequent and staying with us for longer. So if you look at the percentage of people who subscribe to the Financial Times off the back of reading any given article or any chain of articles, we also find that that's higher in content that contains a lot of visualization and data. So again, lots of evidence that as well as the sort of vocal and strong reaction this stuff has been getting on social media, it is causing more people to appreciate what the sort of breadth and quality of work that the FT does, and that, you know, we are a financial news organization, but we're not only a business and finance news organization. We cover the world in much greater breadth and depth than people might have otherwise thought. And we can see explicitly as well people actually saying this. So a couple of examples here, one email on the left and a tweet on the right, of people saying quite directly that it was the work that our team was doing in terms of bringing data and visualization to tell the story of the pandemic that was directly leading people to subscribe. And this was even after all of that work was outside of the paywall. So it's an interesting demonstration there for newsrooms around the world. I think that for paywalled organizations, if you make something free, that doesn't mean people won't still end up subscribing. It's really, you're demonstrating that you care more about informing your audience than about making money, and people actually, you know, surprise, surprise, appreciate that gesture and what it means. And we've continued to have messages like this right through the months, up until even the last couple of days, of people talking about how it was our visual work that has led them to become FT subscribers. So an important part of this is that it's not just about getting some data out there, putting it in a nice colorful presentation and expecting a good reaction. Newsrooms all around the world have been doing a huge amount of visualization work over the last 9, 10, 11 months. But what I want to talk about is how we at the FT particularly optimize the visualizations we produce for that mass audience. There can be a tendency in some parts of the data visualization world to focus on complexity and elegance and intricacy and let's say sort of coolness above actually focusing on the clarity of the message that you're getting across. And that will tend to get a very positive reaction from a certain crowd of people who are very visual, people who are really into data visualization already. But there's a much bigger audience out there of people who maybe they don't think of themselves as numbers people or charts people. And when you focus on making something as sort of cool and shiny as you can, you risk sort of losing those people and letting them think that you're not really speaking to them, that you're doing something for the nerds, as it were. So what we really focus on at the FC is making sure that without sacrificing any elegance or aesthetic qualities of our work, we produce work that can really be understood by a mass audience and a diverse audience in terms of its experience and comfort of working with data and visualizations. So what we do there is we focus on work, including this scientific paper from a couple of years ago, about what it actually is that makes people remember and really be struck by and take away messages from data visualization. So what I'm going to show you in a second is an animation, a screen recording essentially of what these researchers in Washington in the US found, which was they gave an audience hundreds of charts to look at and asked them to just stare at these charts for as long as the chart was in front of them and take away as much information from these charts as they could. And they used eye tracking software when people were doing this to see where are people actually looking, where are people focusing when they are given a chart and asked to take in that information. And so you're going to see in a second this animation showing a blue dot, which shows where people's eyes go when they're presented with a chart. So what you'll see is this blue dot goes straight up to the title there, and this animation will loop, so we'll see it a couple of times. They focus on the title, they read those words, then they come back down and look at some of the other details of the chart, like what's on the vertical axis, and then they read across the actual content of the chart itself. But the key thing is there's a lot of time first spent on the title. And what the authors found there, and this is another way of showing that same data, is that when people were asked to remember those charts and describe what was in those charts, their descriptions mentioned the title, the labels, the paragraphs, all of these text objects, much more than they actually mentioned the contents of the chart, the plot itself. Now, obviously, we're in the world of data visualization here. We're not saying stop making graphics. But what we are saying is text is critical when you want to make graphics that are understood by a mass audience, there'll be a lot of people who, if you just present them with a chart, they're not really sure where to look. They're not really sure what their takeaway should be. But if you use that title and subtitle to set the scene, you immediately give people a message to grab onto, even if they don't see themselves as charts or data people. And that's been critical, I think, to how our work over the last few months has cut through. So this was the first sort of rough version, of the chart that we produced back in March. And you'll see that there's very little text on here. It's still the sort of the geometry, the decisions of what we're showing on this chart are still the same as what we eventually used. We've got the number of days since each country's outbreak really took off along the bottom, and we've got the number of cases in total going up the side. But there's no information here actually telling people what's going on. So even though the decisions of what and where and how to show things on this chart are the same as in our final one, there's no way this chart would have resonated with a mass audience, because people wouldn't really know what they're looking at. Whereas when you see the final version, those shapes, those lines, that choice of countries are exactly the same. But what we've done is we've added this title with the key message that most Western countries are indeed on the same trajectory. They're following in Italy's path, whereas countries like Hong Kong and Singapore in Asia have managed to slow the spread. We've also got these annotations on the right-hand side of the chart, telling short stories about what's going on in each of those countries, so that people aren't just left scratching their head thinking, what is it that they did differently? They can actually see why it is that certain countries may have fared better in combating the virus than others. And it's this messaging that people really grab onto, whether this chart was on our own website or on social media. We can see from the number of people who screenshot the charts on our site and share them on social media that the message is cutting through to them in the page itself. So I just want to emphasize that wording on charts is critical. As you know, we're a species that has been taught to read. It's one of the best ways that humans can communicate quickly. And I think by focusing on good quality, engaging narrative titles and other text on our charts, we can really ensure that our charts and our data visualization work is getting through to as wide and as sort of multi-skilled, multifaceted audience as possible. This was another version we did later on where the story had changed. So we changed the title on the chart. Again, making sure that we had new and fresh information that would cause people to keep coming back to this part of the site. Another key thing we've learned is, and this may seem obvious to some people, is that it's critical that you respond to user feedback when you're putting out data visualization products like this, which are regularly updated. And it's critical that you take on board that feedback, even if you happen to disagree with it. So one of the things that some of our audience were struggling with these charts, and I'll just flip back a second, was that the vertical axis on these charts here is what we call a logarithmic scale. Those numbers go 100, 200, 500, 1000, 2000 there. It's not the usual even breaks that you get in a chart, but that's deliberate. That's because when a virus is spreading exponentially, when each person infects a larger number of people, what you want to do is show that data so that an exponential rise, which would normally arc upwards, becomes a straight line. So it's easier for people to tell what's happening next. But what we found, and it might not surprise you, is that threw some people. There were plenty of people who they kind of understood what the chart actually showed, but they felt like that sort of flattening off of the vertical axis was somehow downplaying the severity of the disease. It was making it look like as the numbers got worse, they became sort of less bad, or it made it look like the numbers of deaths were actually smaller than people felt. Now, again, we had our own sort of scientific and data visualization based justification for doing that, but it was clear that it was causing people some confusion. So our response was we created this interactive version of the chart where people, among other things, could choose whether to use a linear or a logarithmic y-axis. And you can see the chart here using a linear version. And the key there is the customer is always right, as it were, when it comes to data visualization. We need to make sure that our data and our graphics are presented in a form that cuts through to everyone, that doesn't mislead them, even if it misleads them through reasons on their end rather than ours. And that was one big takeaway. We also found more broadly that it was really helpful to actually treat these charts as essentially a product, a journalistic product in and of themselves, and to really encourage people to get in touch with us as if we were our own sort of mini newsroom, So we set up our own email inbox just for coronavirus data at the FT. And you can see back in April here, this was a completely full page of the inbox, and it was more than one page just from one day. And it's people, some people just saying thank you for the charts. It's some people saying, have you considered adding additional charts or additional countries to these charts? It's some people actually saying, here's data for my country, why don't you add that? And it was just clear that by engaging with our readers like this, we were able to really foster much more sort of excitement, enthusiasm, and ownership around these charts, and to ensure that these people were coming back to the page every day because they really felt like they were sort of part of a family or a conversation here. Another thing we found is that COVID has become very sort of polarized over the last few months. I'm sure this is the same in all the countries that you're from. There are some people who think that the virus is being downplayed, we're not talking about it seriously enough, and there are others who think that it's being exaggerated. So another thing we've tried to do in our charts is make them as accessible and as appealing to people on each side of that debate as possible. So here's an example of one looking at how deaths have been rising in European countries in the autumn as we turn into the winter. And what we focused on here is showing the spring, where figures were rising much more steeply, alongside the autumn, so that while people see that, yes, numbers have been rising over the last few months, it's not as dangerous, it's not as steep as it was in the spring. So whether you're someone who's a bit more skeptical or more worried, there's an entry point for you into this chart, and you don't feel that we're just trying to push one angle. Finally, we found, as always, that the best data journalism often means going out and actually getting better data than already exists out there. And the clearest example we had of this was back in the spring when in Ecuador, in South America, the official numbers that the government was reporting made it look as though their death toll was relatively low. It was only around 18 or 19 deaths per day, which was far lower than many other countries. But at the same time, we had reports from our own correspondents in South America that the truth was far, far worse. And there were actually vultures circling the city streets where bodies had been piling up in cardboard coffins. So we went away to find better data from Ecuador that could tell the story more accurately. And we found that when the official figures had been talking about around 17 or 18 deaths per day, the true figure was around 600 or 700 deaths per day. We ended up doing that for a couple of dozen countries around the world, and we've continued to update that data. So it's really shown, I think that's shown to readers that we care more about getting to the truth than just using the most readily available information. I think that's always a key lesson for data journalism. So thank you very much for listening. I think we might have a couple of minutes now for some quick questions. So I will go back to Vera and Anna in the studio.
No, to me, John. Hi, how are you? Good morning.
Hi.
Thank you so much. Yeah, we have some questions here. We will start with Simona Visiani. Simona asks, you guys mentioned this work got the FT News subscribers. At the same time, we talk about erosion of trust in media, furtherly aggravated by the pandemic. Where do you think we stand now?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. And yeah, sorry, Angela, I forgot who I was going back to. I think what's been really clear again is that the pandemic has, yes, it's demonstrated that a lot of readers do lack trust for the media, but I think it's really highlighted the journalism that does encourage trust. So again, I think the fact that at the FT, we were putting this work out there, we were asking for feedback, we were asking people to tell us if they thought we were doing something wrong or if they thought we could improve something. And that, I think, really showed that we cared about what readers think, and that the question we were trying to answer with our work were the questions they had rather than the questions that we or our editors had. And I think any newsroom that has been doing that has been prioritizing just getting information out to readers rather than sort of pushing a specific angle, a specific interpretation, as it were, I think has really shown readers across the world that there still are hundreds and thousands of journalists who are trustworthy and really care about getting people the information they need for their daily lives.
Great, thank you. We have now Umar Hassan. Umar asks, how important is that visual journalism creates opportunities for audiences to invest in a monthly or yearly subscription?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's like every other bit of journalism. It's the single most important thing is that we serve our readers, whether we're asking them to pay or not. We need to be getting the best information out to them. But I think this does just demonstrate that charts, graphics, and data are just as much, they're equally the kind of journalism that people value and are willing to subscribe for as words, as written journalism. And so I think anyone who's producing these ambitious visual projects should absolutely be thinking about them as overarching sort of strategic goals for increasing their audience, as well as simply sort of cool and witty things that readers might like.
We have a question also from Miguel Roca. Miguel asks, how do you source that extra data from Ecuador?
Sure. So that actually came from medical departments and health officials in Ecuador who were telling the government in Ecuador essentially the same thing as us, which was that the official statistics just weren't capturing adequately the number of cases and deaths in the country. So whereas the government was doing the same thing as most countries and saying how many people have lost their lives following a positive test, what the medical department was doing was saying, we're just going to tell you how many people have died of anything, because clearly the testing wasn't up to scratch. And so we used the data that they were publishing in sort of PDF format on their own website to sort of improve upon the official figures based on testing. And
we have time for a last question from David Bush. David asks, which programs and tools do you mostly use for data analysis and visualizations like this?
Sure. So most of this work we do using the D3 JavaScript library. So that allows us really sort of fine-grained, detailed control to really determine every pixel on the page. It also allows us to make things interactive. There are other tools out there as well. We were initially using the ggplot package from the R statistical library, but in the end, D3 is what we're making all of these charts in.
Thank you. Thank you so much, John, for your time this morning and for explaining us what you're doing on FT. Fantastic work.
Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, John, for revealing some of the magic behind the Financial Times coronavirus tracker. And now we move on to talking about data and racism. After George Floyd's killing, the Black Lives Matter movement grew around the world, and inevitable media were part of this process. Weekly, CNN released a study on race and racism in the UK that shed light on the huge difference between Black and white people's perceptions about how race and racism affect their daily lives. And now we're going to have with us Richard Green. He is the project editorial lead and a senior news editor for data and integration at CNA. Richard, welcome to NIS Data.
Hi, Anna. Thanks very much for having me. So good morning, everyone, and welcome to a CNN presentation about confronting racism, real-time social issues, data journalism. So I know that we're focusing mostly on COVID today, and in fact, CNN is working on a big COVID data-driven project that should be out in the next couple of weeks, which we're very excited about. But of course, it's not the only major issue that is confronting the world today and which is approachable via data journalism. So I'd like to start by talking briefly about the Black Lives Matter. You'll remember that the Black Lives Matter is not new this year. It goes back at least 5, 6, 7 years, but it had gone quiet in the past couple of years. Hadn't gone away, but it had gone quiet. In May, there was a killing of a Black man in Minneapolis by police, which was caught on video. I'm going to show just a brief moment of that video in just a moment. It's only about 15 seconds long, but I do want to warn you, it is disturbing video. So if we can go to the next slide, please. I don't know if you heard audio on that slide. So in any case, this was an event that shocked the United States, of course, and CNN in the United States immediately amped up its coverage of race and racism. But we were quick. I'm based in CNN's London bureau, which is the largest bureau outside of the United States. We're the hub for Europe, the Middle East, and Africa. And we noticed very quickly that it was not only in the United States that this was resonating. As you'll remember, perhaps from something that happened in Bristol only a couple of weeks after the killing of George Floyd. We can go to the next slide. You may remember this video. So this was the toppling of the statue of Edward Colston in Bristol. Colston was a slave trader who went on to become a member of Parliament and a wealthy beneficiary of the city of Bristol in particular, which part of his wealth rests on the slave trade. We notice, of course, when you see a crowd like this engaging in activity like this, clearly there is something going on more than just in the United States. And so we wanted to respond to this moment, the moment of the Black Lives Matter, by doing something properly investigative, something data-driven that was going to tell us something about race relations. One of my colleagues, in fact, one of our graphic designers on the digital team in London, Gabrielle Smith, is herself the daughter of Windrush immigrants. And I'm guessing that many of us are familiar with the Windrush Generation. In fact, this is particularly timely today. The Windrush Generation, the largely Caribbean immigrants who came from the British Commonwealth to settle in the UK in the wake of World War II. They were invited here. They were told to come help rebuild the country. And as Commonwealth citizens, they didn't need to have any kind of paperwork to do that in the 1950s and the 1960s. Generations later, they and their children discovered that the British government, in some cases, did not consider them to be citizens. And there was a great deal of harassment involved. This talk today is particularly timely because just this morning, the Equality and Human Rights Commission in this country has ruled that the British government's hostility was discrimination, and that there needs to be reparations for that. So that makes this particularly timely. Videos like this one, the tearing down of the Edward Colston statue, protests against statues, for example, of Cecil Rhodes, the 19th century British imperialist of South Africa, Rhodesia, and so on, convinced us that there was an undertold story about race and racism going on in Britain. I say undertold very specifically. It was not an untold story. It was an underreported story, and I'm going to explain later why I say that. As I say, Gabby Smith, one of our graphic designers, pointed out in the wake of this Edward Colston statue being toppled that Windrush Day, a day which is marked to celebrate the Windrush Generation in the United Kingdom, was at that point 2 weeks away. And so we thought to ourselves, can we do something about race and racism in this country, data-driven, in 2 weeks? I was not entirely convinced it was going to be possible, but what we did was we set up an international brainstorm. CNN journalists across the world, anybody with an interest in this subject, we invited them to join a brainstorm to formulate a questionnaire that we could put to people across this country, across the UK, to investigate the question of race and racism. This was a very unusual format for doing it. Quite frankly, when we do a data, my background is largely in polling. I'm more of a pollster than a statistician. And so when we put together a poll on a social issue, we normally have a fairly small group of senior editorial people in London, or possibly at our world headquarters in Atlanta, or from some relevant bureau. But generally, it's a fairly small group. We spread our net very wide, and we got some really penetrating questions. A particular shout out to one of our journalists in Hong Kong, who is a British Asian woman from Manchester who used to cover the police beat in Manchester. She had some really smart ideas. Some Asian women in the London bureau were quick to point out that the experience, if we're talking about race and racism in the UK, the experience of Black people is not necessarily the same as Asian people, which proved to be very important to us. And I don't want to suggest that only people of color were productive or interesting or useful or helpful, because in fact, one of our most penetrating questions came from a middle-aged, straight white guy, somebody of my generation who's been covering this sort of thing for the tabloid press for a long time. And so the breadth of questions that we had, I think, was what led us to a really strong results in our Confronting Racism project, which we launched on the 22nd of June. we forced people to make specific answers to specific questions. There's a history of polling about race and racism, and it tends to ask people about their attitudes. How would you feel about this? How would you feel about that? We threw all that away, and we asked about, in light of the Edward Colston statue being pulled down, should protesters pull these statues down? In light of what people felt was a lot of harassment of Meghan Markle, do Black celebrities get treated fairly on television and in the media in this country? From our policing reporter, have you been mistreated by police? Do you expect to be treated fairly by police when you're stopped? Very difficult questions to waffle about. If you're asked, would you be happy with your daughter dating a person of a different race? Quite frankly, unless you are a dyed-in-the-wool racist, you know the right answer to that question. You're going to give the right answer. We wanted to press people to say, what is your experience? What has happened to you? What do you expect of the police? What do you see on television? What educational opportunities have you had? What professional opportunities have you had? And do you believe that it was affected by race? The other thing that we made a point of doing was we oversampled Black and minority ethnic people. In the UK, if you're not white, pollsters tend to lump you all together as a group that they call BAME, Black and minority ethnic. We did a sample of 1,000 across the general population, which is what we would normally do. We also did an extra 500 people in order to make sure that Black and minority ethnic people were properly represented. And then, having had these discussions with some of our Asian colleagues, we asked the pollsters to disaggregate. Don't give us just Black and minority ethnic, give us Black results. Tell us what Black people say, and then give us the BAME separately. Now, we have a history of working with a polling agency called Comres. About 2 years ago, I worked on a massive Europe-wide, I say Europe-wide, 7 countries across Europe, more than 7,000 people sampled, study of anti-Semitism across Europe. If we could go to the next slide, you'll see some of the results of that. No, I'm sorry, it's the slide after this, please. This is what probably should have been going as I was talking about the poll. And can we play this? Thank you. So this was a large-scale poll that we did, and I mention it because we spent months and months working on this. As I say, Gabby Smith suggested 2 weeks before Windrush Day that we could do a poll about race and racism in Britain. We literally spent more time once the Shadow Over Europe Anti-Semitism project was done and fully complete and ready to be published. We spent more time deciding exactly when we should publish it than we spent doing the entire Confronting Racism project. Now, as a practical matter, this meant that on the one hand, we were talking to Comres, we'd given them the results of our brainstorm, they were crunching them into proper pollster questions that could be quantified and analyzed and datafied and so on. Don't tell my bosses this. Before I had approval from them for the project, we simply didn't have time. So we were multi-tracking on this. I was having conversations with the pollster saying, okay, look, here's what we need to do. No, we don't need that question. Yes, we do need this question. We need to be able to formulate it in this way. While also having meetings with the bosses saying, I think we should go ahead with this project. I think we should get funding for this project. Yes, definitely, I'm going to take on board all of your suggestions. In the end, it all came together in time. Please don't tell any of them that I did that. We came up with 19 questions on a range of questions from COVID to policing, entertainment, statues, the history of the British Empire, and the Windrush itself. If we could go on to the next slide, please. As I say, we found, so this is a Black Lives Matter protest in Britain. If you look carefully, you'll notice quite a few of the protesters are not Black. I had somebody, I had a student approach me after all the results were published, and he said, your results are skewed towards white people. You have 1,500 people in the survey, only 500 of them specifically BAME. I will point out, 86% of England and Wales is white, whereas only about 2/3 of our sample size was white. So that was we found that, and we found that to be very interesting. When we got the results back, the comparison between the experience of white people and the experience of Black people as separate from BAME proved to be very interesting. I'll be honest, at this point in my mind, the project is a complete blur. We were analyzing data, we were preparing graphics, I was trying to write the story, we were having brainstorms about headlines, our graphics team was off building the data visualizations for it. Editors were working through the night to try to get the whole thing done. But we did, in fact, manage to publish on Monday, the 22nd of June, having worked through the weekend. And here are some of our interesting findings. So we published on Windrush Day. The next slide will show the results of our question about the Windrush. When you separate Black respondents and white respondents, more than half of Black people did not trust that the government would not repeat something like the Windrush scandal. Now, white people also, you'll see 40% there, nearly 4 out of 10 people didn't believe that. So we thought that was a fairly interesting finding. But we did, I referred to one of our middle-aged white guys who had thrown a question in. He wanted to talk about politics. Our next slide will show an interesting finding on the political scene. We asked respondents of all races, do you think various different political parties in this country are institutionally racist? 58% of Black people said yes. Now, interestingly, more than 1/3 of white people said yes. But again, distinct responses between the two groups. Slave traders, very much on our mind. If you go on to the next question, you'll see the difference between what Black and white people thought about whether they found statues of slave traders or colonizers offensive. And we asked this question several different ways. We asked a question about, should the statues be removed? Who should remove them? Should protesters be able to remove them? Should they be removed by city ordinance? Should they stay? And the reason that I mentioned that is one of the things that we did was we formulated each question in several different ways. So I say there were 19 different questions. When I say 19, each one was a complex of questions around a theme. So we were able to pull out the most striking finding. 2/3 of Black Britons say that statues of slave traders or colonizers are offensive. Only, well, not even 1/3, close to 1/3 of white respondents said the same thing. If we move on to talking about the police, do you believe that the police, have you personally, now again, here we're talking about personal experience, have you personally been not treated, and this was a difficult question to formulate, it came out awkwardly, have you not been treated with respect by the police? Half of Black people said that was true. Only 1/4 of white people said this was true. And here we thought the finding, we didn't graph it because we made a point of contrasting the experience of white and Black Britons, but BAME, are we at 49.26 on this? Yes, we are. If you put the BAME results, so if you're adding Asians, British Asians to this group, that's 36%. So it falls roughly halfway between the two. And this I mentioned because here we thought it was particularly striking. If we had contrasted white with BAME, essentially with non-white, you would have had 26-36, not terribly striking. Interesting, but not terribly striking. Here's where we thought the Black response was particularly striking, 49%. And if you go on to the final one that I'm going to put up here, do you believe the police are institutionally racist? Here, on have you not been treated with respect by the police, just under half of Black respondents said that was true. Here, do you believe the police are institutionally racist? Just over half of Black respondents said that. White respondents, quite similar. So those were some of the most striking findings. If we go on to the next slide, you'll see what our published story looked like on the day at the top of the page, and then these graphics There was a written article which I wrote unpacking some of the most interesting findings. We had these 5 charts and graphs, as I say. And again, remember, we asked 19 questions. We cast a fairly wide net. Some of the results were interesting, race and racism, as regarding policing, as regarding statues of slave traders and colonists, as regards the Conservative Party, which is the governing party in this country at the time. Not all of the results were terribly interesting. We asked about COVID. We were aware already back in the spring that if you were Black or Asian, you were more likely to die of coronavirus at that time than you were if you were white. We asked people how they felt about that. Do you believe that it is a result of race or racism or social economic factors, or do you think it's just happenstance? The results were not terribly striking when we broke them down by race and by race, and so we just didn't make a big deal of that. That was the advantage to us of having cast a fairly wide net of questions. We were able to pull out the questions that we thought told the most powerful story. Now, the most powerful story to our audience, and I'm going to, I put my hand up. You can see plainly, I am a middle-aged white guy. I have experience of discrimination in some aspects of my own life, but I would not pretend to have any understanding of what Black and Asian people in Britain are going through. We thought these strikings were very, very striking. In most areas where there was a significant difference, we found Black people 2 to 1 more likely to see, experience, feel, know somebody who has experienced racism than white people. That was our headline. Black and white people have significantly different experiences. And our PR team thought, this is great, very strong findings. We are going to release them on Windrush Day, and we are going to make a big splash. And we didn't. We got some good pickup. We got some discussions going. I feel that it was powerful journalism. But I'll be honest, I thought the Black press, we made a point of approaching historically Black-run media organizations. And we said, look, CNN has done this big study, because when we did the anti-Semitism story, I'm not proud that we uncovered as much anti-Semitism as we did. I think it's very disturbing, but the media picked it up like crazy. We were on the front page of newspapers in Israel the day that we published. We'd been seeking an interview with Benjamin Netanyahu on various subjects for months or years. Literally within a week of publishing the anti-Semitism, we were in Netanyahu's office. And I went and I spoke about the project in Israel, which was lovely. And one of the Israelis who I talked to about the anti-Semitism project said, look, we all know this, but usually it's Jewish organizations that do this kind of research, or it's Israeli organizations that do this kind of research. When CNN does it, it means something different. It's not one of the usual suspects on uncovering anti-Semitism. I thought, great, we've done something similar with the race divide here in Britain. We approached the Black press about it. Silence. And I talked to some of my friends and some of the experts who we interviewed about this, and they said, you know what? We know already. We are Black people in Britain. You are not telling us anything we don't already know, that we and our friends and our families don't experience every day. So look, if we're telling white people something that they don't know, I think that's important. And I'm very proud that we did it. And if we can go on to the next slide, I'm happy to take questions about it.
Hello, Richard. How are you? Good morning.
Hello, how are you?
I'm fine. We have a few questions for you. So let's start with a question from Marcela Kunova. She asked, is there a possibility the results were influenced by the highly emotional events going on at that time? Would you consider to rerun the project now and compare the results?
That's a great question. And yes, look, we are journalists. We are going to, by and large, if we feel like there's a major social issue going on that people need to be thinking about and talking about, we'll jump on it. It was a breaking news project. to turn something around in 2 weeks is essentially breaking news if you're talking about putting a poll in the field and getting results back. So yes, we were trying to tap into something that was emotional and relevant at the time. But Marcella is right. There's, the Black Lives Matter had not, as I say, faded away, but had gone fairly quiet in the year or 2 or 3 before this happened. It is a good idea. We should do the poll when things are different.
We have another question from Eva Constantaras. Eva asked, instead of only having data on racism standalone projects, shouldn't all our race coverage be infused with data that explains the reach and impact of systemic racism?
Yes. And this is not a standalone project. We have continued to use this data. The anti-Semitism data continues to find its way into our stories when we cover that. And this data, this is a very wide data set. As I say, we didn't even put everything in the story. We didn't put all of our findings in the story. The report that came back from the pollster is 187 pages long. People who want that amount of data are welcome to look at it, but we continue to mine that data. And when stories about race and racism in Britain come up, we continue to refer back to these findings. It's, Eva's exactly right. It's not something that we just plop down and say, this is done, we're moving on and doing something else. This continues to inform our coverage.
Another question from Lisa Dupuy. Lisa said that her question is close to Eva's. How to combine with reported on the ground stories or interviews? Wouldn't it be better to do so and extrapolate the collected data to other topics, stories?
So, I'm sorry, on the ground stories and interviews. So yes, as with Lisa and with Marcella, the answer to your question is yes. And in fact, one of my colleagues went out and did a television package that accompanied this. It was we interviewed a Black performance poet. She interviewed a Black performance poet. She was out on the streets of Bristol. She met some people who had been involved in the demonstrations where the Colston statue was pulled down. This is not meant to be PR for CNN, but if you go to the page cnn.com/confronting racism, you'll see she actually did a 7-minute television package, which involved a lot of interviews and personal experiences as well. And for CNN to do a 7-minute package is unheard of. When our packages go over 2.5 minutes, our television producers start to complain. So yes, absolutely. This needs to be a human story. I interviewed an expert, Nova Reed, who was very passionate about the subject and remembers, a Black woman growing up in Britain in the 1980s as a child. She said she remembers other children not wanting to play with her because they said her skin looked like the color of feces and they didn't want to be her friend. So yes, the data is one part of the story, and the human experience and hearing people's voices has to be part of the story as well. This is about what people live through every day. Yeah, I completely agree with Lisa on that.
We have time for one last question, Richard. This comes from Umar Hazam. And he asks, what are the main things to consider when using data journalism to cover social issues? And how important is to be open-minded about covering subjects such as racism?
Yeah, this is Umar. This is a critical question, and thank you for raising this. So this is one of the reasons why I think we needed to have a lot of voices involved in the brainstorm about what questions we were going to ask. You get people who have personal experience, you get people who don't have personal experience of it, and you do need to balance that. This is why we had professional pollsters involved who are able to write quality questions for us that we were going to be able to analyze in a scientific way. And it's a hard thing as a data journalist when you go into something with a thesis like, I believe there's a serious race problem in this country. You do have to be led by the data. If the results come back and they say, it's all peace and love and harmony and everybody is holding hands and skipping through the fields together with no racism, that has to be your story. You can't squeeze the data into a story or a headline or a polemic that it doesn't tell. You have to follow the story where it leads you. Yeah, Umar is absolutely right about that.
Thank you very much, Richard. Thank you very much for your time today. Thank you for being here.
It was my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
A pleasure.
Thank you, Richard, for this insightful presentation. And Vera, I think this is the perfect moment to take a quick look at Sally's work. What do you think?
Sure, let's do that. Yeah.
Okay, no, this is amazing. I think we can see some of the main takeaways from our sessions this morning, and it's going to be amazing. So guys, remember that after the event, we're going to share this graphic on our social media, so stay tuned. And also, I think now is the perfect moment to go for a break. So what if we go for a glass of water, a cup of coffee and tea, and we recharge our energies? So see you in 15 minutes.
Yes, indeed. We will resume in 15 minutes with the panel From Stories to Solutions, Why Journalists Need Access to Public Data, to discuss why it is so important that we are given this access, how we can demand for it, how we can lobby for this access to public data to conduct in-depth reporting and investigative reporting. So after that, we will finish today's program with our online lab sessions in English, French, and German. So enjoy the break and see you in 15 minutes.
No map. not going my way, cause that would be boring. Spend my last cent on cheese and champagne. What a wonderful morning. Never mind, she declined to the first date. It was only on my birthday. Never mind all the lines on the highway. Give me time to reflect a bit, cause I'm just having a good day. Having a good day. Having a real good morning. I'm just having a good day. Having a good day. Having a real good morning. Real good morning. Real good morning. I guess that things can only get better from here, but sometimes I wonder, I might have met the love of my life, but I lost a number. Never mind, she declined to the first date. I went to Vegas with a roommate. Never mind all the lines on the highway. I aim to misbehave, cause I'm just having a good day. Having a good day. Having a real good morning. I'm just having a good day. Having a good day. Having a real good morning. I'm just having a good time. Having a bad day, yeah. A real good morning. A real good morning. A real good morning. I'm just having a good day. Having a good day. Having a real good morning. I'm just having a good day. Having a good day. Having a real good
Welcome back to the second half of our News Impact Summit on data on the second day of our event. Before we reinitiate our sessions, a brief thank you note to our sponsor and partner, Google News Initiative, for making these summits possible. And up next, I am delighted to introduce you to this great panel, From Stories to Solutions, Why Journalists Need Access to Public Data. So access to public information is often very necessary for producing in-depth and investigative journalism that helps unveil corruption, organized crime, conflicts of interest, and much more. That brings actually power to account. In the misinformation and disinformation age, this access has never been more important. But in certain countries and contexts, it's also very challenging to obtain this information. So I would like to welcome Matthias Vermeulen. I hope I pronounced that correctly, who will be moderating the panel. Matthias is the Public Policy Director at AWO, a data rights agency with branches in London, Paris, and Brussels, who has been working and helping journalists navigate the intricacies of access to public data, often held by governments and other public bodies. Good morning, Matthias, and welcome. I will now leave you to introduce our guest speakers and to conduct the discussion.
Thank you very much, Vera, and thank you for that introduction in this extremely important and very timely topic. I'll briefly introduce our speakers and let them introduce their latest projects related to access to public data so that we have as much time as possible to dedicate to the Q&A section at the end as well. First up, I would like to introduce David Cabo, director at Civio, which is an independent non-profit organization based in Spain, which monitors public authorities and which lobbies to achieve effective transparency from, in particular, the Spanish institution. They replaces as his co-director, Eva Belmonte, who had to cancel at the very last minute, but we are very happy to have you with us, David. And the floor is yours for the next 5 to 8 minutes, and I'll be keeping track of the time.
Okay, great. Thanks, Matthias, and thanks everybody for the invitation. I must say, Eva is terribly sorry she couldn't make it. I mean, you're missing out. She's much better speaker than me, and she has much more energy than me. But she had a family emergency, so she's really sorry. So about Civio, as Matthias said, we are a non-profit organization since 2012, based in Spain. And from the beginning, our mission as a non-profit newsroom has been to hold power accountable. And the way we tried to do it from the beginning was using journalism. And what we found was, linking to the topic of the panel, which is why public data is necessary. Basically, what we found was in Spain is that since we didn't have an access to information law, journalism relied too much on insider sources or leaks, and it was very difficult for journalists to hold their own agenda, or at least for us. So we saw from the beginning the passing an access to information law and improving it and making it work was like a way to create a level playing field that allowed anyone to access and to hold accountable power outside the traditional media and for organizations like us. And also it was a way to move from commenting on whatever the politician said yesterday into actually going into the bottom of issues, finding official documents, finding reports, finding out why a certain decision was made, always with facts and in a very transparent and thorough way. So that's been our mission since the beginning. And very briefly, I will explain how we do it. Sometimes what we do is we find information that is already public, but maybe it's not well known, like maybe official gazettes, which is a big topic for us. We work a lot with that. So for example, we have a very successful project about presidential pardons in Spain. We were the first to collect the pardons for the last 20 years in Spain, and we published a website, and we also published a number of analyses explaining who was being pardoned, how many people were being pardoned, what were the crimes that were being pardoned. And we were able to show that there was a bias, both left and right governments were pardoning kind of friendly politicians or corrupt businessmen or even policemen that had been accused of torture, or condemned for torture, actually. So the key element for us was first that the number of pardons was reduced a lot. When we published this, there were like 500 pardons a year in Spain. A couple of years after we published it, it went down to 50. So, and we know it's because the government felt like heightened pressure, like they saw that people were watching, because we keep this updated and we monitor it daily. So we saw a clear impact there because someone was looking, basically, someone was counting, and that changed the situation. And the other important effect for us was that I think we moved the public debate from a very, a debate based on anecdotes, like high-profile cases picked by the opposition party and kind of republished by media in a very non-thorough way, to a debate based on trends, like what's going on in the last few years, like talking about, like numbers based on trends and 20 years of data. And for us, that's very important. And I think that's kind of summarizes what we do. Clearly, the data, which is, I think, is another topic for the panel today, the data is not there. Often, like especially the data that is most interesting is very hard to get. And I guess we'll talk about it. So sometimes it's not in the official gazette and you cannot just pick it up. Sometimes you have to ask for it and fight for it. And we spend sometimes years following access to information requests, Some of them are very basic, even like the names of advisors that are working for the ministers in Spain. That wasn't public, so we spent like more than 2 years in court, because part of what we do is actually a strategic litigation, and we go to court to try to get this information. So even basic stuff is very hard to get, and sometimes the formats, we can talk about formats later, that's also a big issue. And I think one element that makes us a bit different, at least in these conferences, is that we are not a pure newsroom organization, because sometimes we do advocacy also. Our view, which I think is a big among journalists, and we understand, so we are very careful about how we do it, and we do a very targeted, narrow and transparent advocacy around issues mostly about access to information or press freedom, and we see that as a continuation of our investigation. So for example, we did a big investigation about public procurement, about how contracts were being fragmented to avoid controls, and we found that some of the data we needed to identify corruption rings was not available, or was very bad quality. So we lobbied to improve the law, because the law was being modified, and we managed to introduce like an article that is almost verbatim what we proposed, which says what information has to be public for each tender. So for us, that's a very natural continuation of, since we identified an issue and we see that there is a barrier that doesn't let us do our work, we continue. We then meet the parties and try to introduce this in the political agenda. It's not a very common thing for newsrooms to do, but we think it makes sense. And lastly, since it's a very hot topic now about the COVID crisis, what we are seeing in Spain is quite worrying. I mean, one of the first things the government did in Spain was to stop answering information requests, because they said it was too difficult. While other functions of government were not stopped, and public workers were still working remotely, but they stopped answering all the requests with no further explanation. And actually, the information they've been publishing, the government has been very bad. And we don't want to go into that, but what we are scared is that it's very hard to know. Even to get concrete data about indicators like number of deaths or infections sometimes is too tricky. And for us, it's very important that, I mean, people are losing trust in Spain, because they see a lot of the measures being taken as political. Yes, the government is sometimes seen as worrying more about spin and PR than about the actual impact of measures. And it's very hard to counteract that because like things like who are the experts that are advising the government, how are measures evaluated, how are they being monitored, a lot of that information is just not being made public. So that opacity for us is like a step back. It's like we are going back to the times when we didn't have an access to information law in Spain, and we are trying to fight that. So yeah, but that would be a short summary, and happy to discuss further.
Excellent. Thank you very much, David. And I think these are indeed already a number of topics that we will definitely touch upon in the Q&A, such as like increased obstacles against data access requests, for instance, or what effect that the role of the COVID-19 crisis has also been in this increased reluctance in handing over data. Next up, I think our speaker doesn't need that much of an introduction. Stéphane Horel, if I pronounce that correctly, works as an investigative journalist for Le Monde, where she is specialized in corporate lobbying, conflict of interest, and the manipulation of science. And her in-depth work on the EU regulation of endocrine disrupting chemicals was awarded the Louise Weiss Prize for European Journalism. Go ahead, Stéphane, the floor is yours.
Good morning. Do you see me, or is the blurred image for everyone or just for me?
It's a little bit blurred, but we can hear you in any case.
That's very strange. That's a little impressionist. Sorry about that. Thank you for the introduction. I have slides to show you. I want to explain to you how we used freedom of information request during the implant files investigation with the Investigative International Consortium for Investigative Journalists, ICIJ, in 2018. So I don't know how I'm supposed to do that with the slides.
I think Vera or Anna can indeed, like if you can push on share screen, you usually should be able to do it.
Okay, sorry about that, people. I had no idea. I thought that was like a secret operator in the back room who would show the slides. So this is my first slide, and then share screen, right? So can you see the slides?
Yes, it's there.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Okay, great. So this is a breast implant, by the way. I mean, all the collage are implants from the investigation. So the ICIJ implant files investigation started in 2018 for almost a year, and contrary to the Panama Papers kind of investigation, the starting point was the absence of papers. We didn't have anything. The point of this investigation was to get data on incidents and damages caused by medical devices, and medical devices are like a category of medical objects that go from hospital beds to heart implants or stents or pacemakers, for example. So to get the data on this in each country, we had to make freedom of information requests. The only exception was the United States, where there's a whole database of the Federal Food and Drug Agency, the FDA, and in Europe there was nothing. It's a complete void. So in total, we filed 1,500 FOIs around the world. Most of them were from Mexico, and they obtained almost anything. And in France, we filed a few of them. The whole point of the investigation in Europe was a group of private companies called the notified bodies, because in Europe you don't have some such thing as something like the European Medicines Agency. You've got the EMA that supervises the marketing of drugs around Europe and checks that even there are lots of holes in the system. They are checking drugs before they are put on the market. With medical devices, it's very different. You don't have an official body. You have private companies called notified bodies that the manufacturers go to with a check, basically, for them to read their written file. Sometimes they don't even see the implant itself. And the notified body grants what we call the CE mark, Conformité Européenne. So that's the kind of sign you can see under your toaster or your toothbrush. It's the same kind of process. And then if you go to get this CE mark to a Hungarian notified body, you can market your implant all over Europe. So in France, we have a law that dates from 1978, and it's very, very poor. It's very weak, and it's almost never used by journalists. So that was a good occasion, because there's only one notified body in France, one of these private companies. At that time there were 58 around Europe, and one in France. And we were very lucky that this notified body was a semi-public organization. We call it Public Body of an Industrial and Commercial Nature, EPIC. So it means you can FOI basically those bodies. And what we asked them is the list of the medical devices they had certified, they had given this CE mark to, but also the list of medical devices they had that were denied certification. And that would have been a very important starting point for a sub-part of the investigation, because there's a phenomenon that we were aware of that is called forum shopping, where a manufacturer can go, if you go, you knock at the door of a Hungarian notified body, and they say, no, your file is not good enough, we won't give you the CE mark, then you can go to the UK or to Germany or wherever there is a notified body, and you can try to get a certification from them. So that's an open door to corruption and many other investigative topics. So, of course, the French notified body, which is called LNE, GMED, refused to give the two lists, and they said that the list represented actually their client list, which was something they wouldn't communicate to the outer world. So we made an appeal to the Freedom of Information Commission that exists in France. It's called the CADA, Commission d'accès aux documents administratifs. And it took them several months to rule about this. And they sent us their ruling on the day we published the implant files. So it was already too late. And they backed the decision, the refusal of the notified body, arguing that releasing the documents may adversely affect trade secret. So trade secret is a specific thing. It's not just like, it's different from commercial secret. Since 2016, when there was this trade secret directive that was adopted at the EU level, it was transposed in the French law in July 2018. And so it means that this ruling by the French Freedom of Information Commission was the first application of this directive in France. And contrary to what all the profession was dreading when there was this the discussion at the EU level, it was not used by a company to prevent journalists from investigating, but it was the argument of trade secret was put forward by a public body against journalism and on a public health issue. So we decided to sue. So there's a lawsuit that is still ongoing. It's Le Monde, but also 43 organizations that joined us, NGOs, but lots of journalist association within each news outlet. You have a journalist Société des rédacteurs, we call them, and they all joined us in this procedure. We were in court on the 1st of October 2020 and waited like 15 days to get the ruling. And so we call it an administrative tribunal. What they ruled is that the list of medical devices that were certified by LNE should be released to us, but they backed this idea of trade secret, protecting the list of medical devices that were denied certification. And what is really wrong with this decision, where of course we are happy with the first point, but we are very unhappy about the second one, because the second part of the request was the most important in terms of information. And we disagree with that, because it's not like we want to access the technical part of the files that the manufacturers presented to the notified bodies. What we want to access to is just the name of the device and the name of the manufacturer to check whether this device is, despite the fact that it was judged at some point not good enough to be left on the EU market, whether it is actually on the EU market. And so now where we are is that we are in the discussions of how to make the appeal to the Conseil d'État, which is like the Supreme Court for administrative decisions. And so this is where we are, and we are. It's a very important procedure in the sense that all over Europe, it's the first time that this trade secret directive is used. Apparently, it has not been used in other countries. So the jurisprudence on this will be very important and a good indication of what could happen elsewhere.
Thank you very much, Stefan. And it's indeed going to be really interesting to see how other countries and other organizations in other countries are going to use the Trade Secrets Directive or actually build further upon this case as well. And we'll talk a little bit about this in the Q&A as well. But next up, I want to introduce Anatoly Bondarenko, the co-founder and the head of data journalism at texty.org.ua, which is a small independent media organization based in Kiev in Ukraine since 2010. And Texty's main focus relies on topics such as education or the environment, and its newsroom prefers actually reproducible journalism based on open source data and code. Anatoly, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. Yes, I'm head of data journalism at Texty, and we really we are a small newsroom, but we have a relatively big data team. It's 6 people, and we did a couple of we are doing a couple of projects, a few projects with data journalism projects, and we are the winners, by the way, of this year's Sigma Awards for as the best news application. We use computational methods, machine learning, artificial intellects. I mean, specifically deep neural networks to study propaganda, pro-Russian propaganda in Ukraine, and we use different types of modeling to show our readers some specific details and some future prognostication to make to forecast. For example, we did a project about COVID-19 with probabilistic programming. We are modeling effective reproduction number, one of the main parameter of epidemic, to show in real time how it is going in our country. And for this project specifically, we need a big couple of different sources of data. For example, data about we need precise data about number of new infected peoples. We need data about number of tests, of different tests. We need data about mortality. And when we started this project a few months ago, we found that basically the data is absent. To be precise, we have about, I guess, 5 different dashboards with interactive graphics about COVID-19 here in Ukraine, but you cannot get data to download data from any of this dashboard, and you have to do it manually. And we have, but we try to use freedom of information requests for this, but it failed. Not only because, as my colleague mentioned, that governmental institutions refuse in the time of COVID to give data due to high load and other reasons, but also because I guess the main problem with freedom of information request is such situation as COVID-19 epidemic is that actually freedom of information requests is not very useful in this situation because of very different speed of data flow. I mean, freedom of information requests take a few days, probably weeks, so they are slow by nature, and this situation requires very quick answers, near real-time data, and FOIA just don't fit to this situation. So probably this is main problem, and this problem is the same in each country. But also I think that despite of this, this information request is still useful because they create some kind of demand to some kind of indication for governmental bodies which type of information they have to provide by another means. So after such requests, our government some people from our government created very good feeds of data. Not from the start of epidemic, but say from the May we have very good data sources on such sites as GitHub, for example. So now we just can use and if freedom of information requests were absent, our government just they the demand and our governmental bodies cannot know about specific demands in specific data. So I guess for us is useful, but in kind of indirect way. You cannot get useful real-time information for pandemic from FOII, but you create demand for such information, and hopefully after some time the government will provide it in one or another form. So, okay. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Anatoly. And I think that's a really good point that you raise as well in the sort of the features of freedom of information requests, that they can actually indeed generate a demand and actually result in the creation, in the best case scenario, of specific data sets that become available to journalists or to the wider public. Last but not least, we have in this panel Friedrich Lindenberg, the senior data editor at the OCCRP, which is known, of course, as the Organized Crime and Corruption Reporting Project, a consortium of investigative centers, media, and journalists operating mainly in Eastern Europe, the Caucasus, Central Asia, and Central America. And at OCCRP, Friedrich is responsible for the development of its data toolkit, Aleph, and he supports investigations where data analysis is needed. So, Friedrich, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Yeah, you've already said what OCCRP is. What we do is we do these really kind of straight up investigative investigations that follow the money a lot of the time, right? Where there is some kind of abuse of either public funds or private funds, money laundering we work a lot on, and the kind of kleptocracies that this kind of illicit finance eventually creates in the countries that are most affected by it. And in terms of how this plays out as data work, I think we look for data that really helps us to follow the money. Part of that data is illicit, leaked information that comes from sources, but a lot of it is also public data that we collect from a variety of sources. And so this is almost entirely an opportunistic activity that we do, where we basically go through the internet and see what information is published in what country. So if you wanted to know who owns a company in Kosovo, then Kosovo is one of those countries where that information is being made public. And what we then do is we put that information into this website that we operate called OCCRP Aleph, which is basically an archive of as much of this kind of information that helps people to follow the money, documents company ownership, documents of interest, gazettes, government procurement, etc. And now this is kind of long-term work, and a lot of the investigative journalism that we do is also kind of long-term investigative reporting, where an investigation will often take 6 months to a year to really complete. And so with COVID coming in, we're also wondering, how do we actually react to this crisis, right? Because our usual velocity, given the speediness of events, seemed somewhat inappropriate. And so we actually ended up thinking about the same topic that David already mentioned, public procurement, right? COVID was an unseen before a challenge in terms of how do countries kind of allocate resources in a crisis, and how do they kind of also contend in a world market. You might remember in the early month of COVID, in March and April and also May, there was a literal race for who can get the most personal protective equipment and medical equipment, ventilators, all that kind of material. So what we wanted to retain was kind of this idea of collaborative cross-border investigative reporting, right? So we basically built a network of, I think, around about 70 or so investigative media and journalists from different countries, and tried to collect what are all the public contracts that we can get our hands on at as short a notice as possible, right? This is Bosnia, this is the Czech Republic. And this kind of turned into sort of a living resource where we wouldn't just kind of complete collecting all of this data, but it kind of turned into a tracker where if there was a good story or a good lead in one of those contracts that we discovered, people would immediately go and write it up in their country. But then we were eventually able to kind of also look at the bigger picture and see what has actually been the behavior of governments more generally, what has been the outcome of kind of this procurement race, and what has been the transparency that the different countries showed in this crisis. So this is kind of our evil little map where you can see like what our effective ability to find COVID procurement at a moment's notice was. This obviously is a little bit of a function both of our ability to find the information and of the government's willingness to release the information, but it's kind of giving you an idea of where information was actually made available, and then Belarus, right? And so that's kind of the meta picture. What I think is interesting about this is kind of the attempt to make a competitive analysis. So to look at, for example, the range of prices that in different contracts, different countries would pay for personal protective equipment, FFP2 masks, all that kind of material, and see looking at the outliers, right? So you can see that in this example, the Czech Republic and Ukraine kind of made some of the most off-center kind of purchases of personal protective equipment, and that most of the other kind of European countries actually ended up in some kind of range, even though there was a suspicion that there might be, I would say, kind of crisis profiteering, right? The other thing that we obviously observed was compliance in this context. It's interesting, Stefan, that you brought up kind of these certificates. That's also a big thing we were able to see with kind of personal protective equipment during COVID, that a lot of material didn't either have certification, or the certification was very blatantly fake. And so we basically they're like these diploma mills for CE certificates, and those were used a lot for the masks that actually ended up being bought by European governments. The other thing that obviously happened a lot was that governments would sort of suspend their procurement procedures, right? Normally a government, when it wants to buy something, right, it's a process that takes months, if not years. And for COVID, obviously governments kind of hotwired that process quite a lot. As an analysis, I wouldn't even say, like, normally that's kind of a really strong indicator of corruption. But like if people are dying, then probably adhering to a multi-month process is not the right approach to take. And so this is probably a desirable outcome. And what we also ended up doing eventually was to actually publish a database of all these procurement contracts from like I would say the first and second wave of COVID, right, if you will, all the different payments. So anyone can go to our website and kind of see what kind of contracts did Bulgaria make and whom with. And then you kind of link back to also where we found this information. A lot of the information that we actually ended up using in this was related to TED, the European Procurement Portal. What didn't end up working at all was freedom of information requests. I think just like this week, we received a response to a thing that we filed in April. So that's not practical in a context like this. But it's been an interesting experience basically for us to try and see, rather than doing these kind of big long-term projects, can we do kind of a trailing project that kind of both supports day-to-day reporting, for example, on the invalid certificates, but also supports later on a kind of meta-analysis looking at the different contracts and what the actual kind of unit prices, for example, per country were. Yeah, so that's kind of one of the latest projects we've been working on.
Thank you very much, Friedrich. And I think this is indeed really like a common theme among all of your contributions is the whole question, like what is actually the effectiveness of the current state of FOIA request and Freedom of Information acts or laws to actually facilitate and enable the real-time or at least a much quicker release of public access data that is needed to hold sort of the powers that be to account. We can come back to this a little bit later in the Q&A, but I'm also really interested in hearing from our panelists how they deal with sort of data access obstacles in general. And I think it's quite timely also given a report that has come out 2 days ago from Open Democracy, which revealed this sort of rather secretive unit in the UK government called the Clearinghouse Unit, which instructed basically governmental departments in the UK on how to respond to quote unquote sensitive freedom of information requests, which were coming especially from a sort of blacklist of journalists and civil society organizations. And so their new reports also highlights how the UK government has granted fewer and rejected more freedom of information requests than ever before, and often stonewalls requests as well. And I was wondering, is this sort of a trend against turning over information that you see coming back in your own work as well? Feel free to maybe, I think David has also mentioned this a little bit, and Stefan, so feel free to jump in.
Yeah, thanks, Matthias. Yeah, definitely we are seeing that trend in Spain. I mean, we started with a very crappy law with a lot of deficiencies, limited scope. From the beginning, it was clear that it was very weak, and it has like a lower strength than personal protection law. So it's been used. I mean, from the beginning, we knew it was going to be hard, but what we've seen in the last few years, in a way, is that the government learned how to trick the law. I mean, at the beginning, there is this independent body in Spain which doesn't have a lot of power, but at least could advise the government to release information. And what we've seen over the last couple of years is that the government kind of realized that actually doesn't really need to listen to this independent body, so why bother? And the other thing we've seen is that, I mean, we started litigating 3 years ago because we saw that some information we couldn't get like on good terms, so we had to play hard. And what we are seeing more and more is that the government is basically rejecting things that previously released, so it's forcing us and some other people to litigate. So it's kind of getting us tired and spending our resources, because every question, even one that is not critical for national security, suddenly becomes a big issue and you have to go to court, and it takes years. So we are happy to do that, and we had a couple of wins at the Supreme Court against the government, which made us very happy. But it's true that it is worrying, because we see the government dragging their feet and making everything much harder. So definitely,
Friedrich, I saw you nodding as well. Is this also something that you are experiencing?
Yeah, I'm almost kind of wondering whether there's been kind of a moment of peak transparency in Europe, at least, that's kind of passed and is now kind of slowly trending back a little bit towards more opacity. Both, I think, kind of utilizing, as David's saying, lawsuits, but also privacy legislation a little bit as means of kind of preventing the disclosure of information. One example that I'm dealing with right now is that we're trying to get access to information about the contracts, the payments that the European Union makes to what's called pre-accession countries, right? Countries that are due to become members of the European Union in some more or less distant future. And what we're seeing there is this kind of beautiful ping pong game where there's like 3 or 4 different European institutions that all don't feel responsible for this, don't have the information, ask these people, and it kind of feels very routine and almost, I would be surprised if there hadn't been a meeting about like how to kind of play this ping pong game there. And so, yeah, I think you find yourself in these kinds of tunnels more and more of people having understood that like transparency legislation is in place, and then kind of having thought really hard and effectively about the mitigation against that, which is quite concerning.
Stefan, like, yes, I saw you wanted to chip in as well.
Yes, I agree with this representation of there was this peak in transparency and then everybody's going backwards. Just for the anecdote, in France, I would say that one of the main obstacles to freedom of information request is the ignorance of the law by the very authorities. So in the past months, for example, I made a request to the French presidency because Emmanuel Macron had the very good idea to take as an advisor for agricultural matters a former lobbyist for the wine industry. And so I'm working on the wine alcohol lobby. So I requested the correspondence of this person with the wine sector. And well, I made a call before the email because I don't know the French presidency people, and the person on the phone was like almost like hanging up on me because she didn't even know the law existed. And I told her, well, I'm not asking you whether you want to reply. You have to, and I just need an email address to send my request. So this is for the funny anecdote. But I managed to get the documents in the end. But what's more serious is the how things are going at the EU level. In 2013, 2014, I was working on the lobbying of the chemical and pesticides industry against the regulation of a certain type of chemicals called endocrine disrupting chemicals. And at that time, I made massive freedom of information requests, and I got hundreds of pages, thousands of pages of emails that helped me reconstruct exactly how this lobbying worked and succeeded, which is very rare to manage to point, lobbying consequence and not just lobbying happening. And but in the course of these requests and requests made by NGOs on the same topics, we saw the European Commission change the scope of the law without, they are not supposed to do that. That's the parliament. This parliament is supposed to deal with that. But they changed some tiny details that makes it much more complicated to understand what's going on. And I'll give just one example. When I made this request in 2013, I had the names of people who wrote the emails inside the European Commission. And that's very important to understand the dynamics and the positions and wars sometimes inside the Commission. And now they say it's only the bosses' emails you can see the names of. So, but the lobbying in Brussels happens at the policy officer level, not at the head of unit and director or commissioner level. That's much lower. And now it's black box. And so this is, for me, this is a very serious step back.
And I think that's indeed a really interesting observation as well, because we see on the other hand that the European Commission, for instance, is going to propose in the next month actually new obligations, for instance, on new transparency obligations on the big tech companies to provide more access to data in the name of the public interest. And so it's interesting to see this sort of tension when it comes to releasing information and data from themselves, actually. I have one more question that is related to what we just discussed before we open it up to the general audience. But I'm also wondering, because many of you are actually actively working together with NGOs, with social justice movements in making use of freedom of information requests. How can this sort of activism coexist with journalism without damaging its independence? And do you think this sort of increased cooperation with other civil society actors are sort of part of the reasoning that we are beyond this peak transparency, as Friedrich called it, and this trend towards more opacity? Feel free if any of you wants to respond to this one.
Yeah, well, I'll start again. Yes, because we do advocacy and it's part of our mission, but we try to be very careful about it, and we are very targeted about it. And we focus on like mostly access to information and accountability measures, but also the way we like to see it is that when we start an investigation, we don't know what, I mean, we start with a question. We don't know what the agenda is. I mean, we don't have a previous agenda. We find stuff during the investigation, and then we propose amendments to accountability or transparency. And we collaborate with other NGOs, but we treat them as sources. I mean, we don't adopt their agendas or anything like that. I mean, we are happy for our information to be used by others, because if we uncover like lobbying or whatever, it can be used by people with a specific agenda to use that. But we try to keep our journalism independent. Like we start, when we approach a topic, we don't know what we are going to find, and we start with a question. We don't go in thinking we are going to prove that this lobbying is bad, but we just want to uncover the stuff, and then other people can use that if they want. That's our approach.
Yes, if I can add something to that. Sorry, Friedrich. As I don't see a problem in this damaging of independence. I mean, NGO do NGO work, and journalists do journalism. And if there's one thing journalists should advocate for, is transparency from public bodies. I mean, that's our work in a democracy. So the fact that we have a common goal, transparency of public institutions, is not, I don't think is a problem. It's like we do complementary work, and it's better to talk with each other rather than not to talk.
Excellent.
I also think it's incredibly helpful for activists, right? Like, I feel in a way what activism is building a hammer, but at some point you have to try out whether it can actually smash in a nail. And so I think, with a lot of transparency regulations, for example, that are being established. One example that happened a couple of years ago was around kind of extractive industries. You can have a lot of meetings about the transparency in that sector. But then eventually the question becomes like, is the information that is being released actually practical to answer real questions, about especially political power and economic power, right? And if the information is not sufficient, then you find out basically at the moment that someone's trying to do journalism with it, right? And that kind of feedback cycle, I think, is also super virtuous.
Yeah. Also because if a journalist has been working on money laundering, for example, for 10 years, she knows exactly what the mechanisms are. So if there is a law proposing like a company registry transparency, that journalist knows a lot about the tricks and whether the measures being proposed are going to be effective. So that's why we believe that the knowledge from journalists that know a topic very well, because they've been doing it for 10, 20 years, is really important when doing advocacy. And it can be done by the same people or different people, that we can discuss, but that knowledge is really important.
Okay, I see we only have 15 minutes left to wrap up the conversation. So let's turn to the audience to see which questions they might have. And I believe that Angela is going to surface some questions for us.
Yes, hello guys. Thank you so much for your nice presentation here, for this discussion in this panel. We have some questions from our audience, and we will start with the one asked by Emily Chesney. Yeah, here it is. Emily asks, have some of you ever been forced to drop a story because of a lack of public data available?
Yes, many times. It happened for us many times, and for this crisis, we can't publish a story about excess mortality because with the help of, as Friedrich say, ping pong game, and we found that very pity state of mortality statistics in Ukraine. It's a very big structural problem. It's not the fact that governmental institutions don't want to answer our FOIA. It's just the fact that they cannot answer in principle, because we found after our request that the delay between death and one record in database about mortality is 2 months, and we cannot do anyone just right now cannot do anything about this process. It's kind of very big infrastructural problem in gathering these statistics in Ukraine. So we have to drop this story because we cannot get good and fast almost real-time access mortality data.
I would also add, I mean, there's data that isn't public, but I think should be public, and that's every day, right? So if we knew how to ask what companies does a person own in Cyprus or in the British Virgin Islands, right? We drop an investigation every 2 hours about not knowing the answer to that question, right? Who owns a piece of real estate here in Berlin where I'm sitting? I think there's an investigation dying every minute about that topic. So I think there's a lot of data that I would argue would benefit from being public, and we just don't have access to.
I continue. Well, you were talking before about the role of collaboration. So Umar Hassan asked, how important is the role of collaboration when covering stories or investigations that involve public data? And Lisa Dupuy, here it is, follows up on these questions. So she adds, in-person public data and disclosing governmental information through FOIA type requests. Are you looking for scoops or opening up info for all press, including competitors? Someone wants to respond?
I can start with the last one, for example. I mean, when we submit a freedom and access to information request, we try to be the first ones, and we don't publicize it. I mean, I'm not a journalist. I'm a co-director. I'm not a journalist. I'm a technical person. But the journalists clearly they want to be the first to tell the story, and that's right. But what we do is when we start litigating, we start talking about it. So if we get the information, great, we publish the story. We also publish the data, the raw data in every story we make and the methodology, so others can reuse it, and maybe we open a field that others want to follow. But if it doesn't work and then we start to litigate and all that stuff, then we openly talk about it, because then we make a story about kind of how the government is hiding that bit. But at first, we try to be the first to break up a topic, identify an issue.
Someone wants to add something else?
For the first question, I would give a shout out also to the many really good organizations that exist that focus on doing FOIA work explicitly, and that sometimes also have litigation funds. Here in Germany, there's Frag den Staat, which is kind of an FOI portal. On the European level, there's Ask the EU and Access Info. And I think kind of partnering up with these on a kind of more strategic FOI matter can be really useful, right? It doesn't help if you're in the day-to-day run, but if you're trying to make an example out of an FOI request, these are interesting players to team up with.
Yes, if I may add something, it's a recent example I've heard about at the Data Harvest Conference. It's called the Shell Papers investigation in the Netherlands, where they're trying to understand the grip of the Shell company in the Netherlands. And what they decided to do is a very interesting move, I think, is not to be secretive about the requests. So it took them months to build up 17 requests to 17 different public bodies, and they publicized it, and they created a website so the public can follow each of the requests. And their choice was, the reason to do that is to put pressure on the public authorities with the public opinion. And I think that's an interesting way of doing investigative journalism through FOIs too.
We have Anatoly, I think you wanted to add something?
Yeah, it's just a short remark. We have examples that we got inspired by other media organizations about some topics, and we, in some cases, we tried to did this some kind of reporting about this topic, but from another angle, from data analysis, for example. And that was the case when we analyzed thousands of images, for satellite images, after about illegal mining in the north of Ukraine, about illegal amber mining. We created first interactive map of all, with the help of machine learning. We created first interactive map of all spots where with illegal amber mining. But this topic, we got this from another media organizations for which reported about it before our work. We just try to add some kind of additional value using data journalism in such cases.
We have time for one last question, and this comes from the Torpila. Yeah. What to do if the oversight body of my country is stated as no oversight body, appeal to courts? Some answers.
Appeal to the public first, I would say. I think, yeah, what just came up, also the idea of turning some of these access issues into real public debates is helpful, right? And sometimes it even might expedite what a court will eventually decide. I think in general, right, we've been treating FOI during the kind of high season of transparency as kind of a very formalistic issue. And I think it's time to now politicize it more and to kind of say, no matter what the law says, this is something that the people should know, right? And to become advocates for access to critical information. And even if there's maybe no legal foundation, the government can always decide to publish something, right? I don't think any country has a law that mandates that it cannot.
So thank you so much for your answers. We don't have much more time left. So, I mean, I come back to you, Matthias. So yeah, I hope to see you again in the next conference that we may have next year.
Yes, thank you, Angela. And I would really like to thank the organization and all our four excellent speakers to discuss this topic and really illustrate again, like why access to public data is so important to achieve accountability from a whole range of actors, while also highlighting that actually it is much more challenging than ever to get access to the most relevant data in a timely fashion these days. So thank you very much. Like if this would be a real conference, like I would invite the audience to applaud. So I will just do it myself right now. But thank you all and see you another time.
Thank you, Matthias.
Thank you very much, Stefan, Friedrich, Anatoly, David, and Matthias for this incredible and insightful panel. There are some interesting links shared in the live chat, so please take a look. They can help you make your requests for access to public data. Another link also can lead you to more information about the work that Stefan mentioned, the Shell papers. So please take a look at that and feel free to share more in the live chat. Well, when you're enjoying your time, it seems like things do fly and everything happens fast because we are about to move on to the final sessions of our second day at NIS Data. But before wrapping up, shall we see how Sally has translated the day in her drawings, Anna?
Yeah, let's see. Okay, that's amazing. As we saw before, Sally just tried to put together all the main takeaways of our sessions and also from our panel. We talk about the relationship between data and also the corona crisis, also race and racism, and also how to have access to data and the implications this situation has for data journalists. So, Sally, thank you very much for that. This is an amazing graphic that summarizes what we experienced today. And I think it's time to start with our labs, online labs. And if you want to participate in the English lab with Clara 10, just stay with us, stay with me in this live stream.
Indeed, yes, you can stay with Clara to learn more about reporting on the human side of data. But if you prefer to join the session in German with Nathalie Sablowski and Janis Hock from Westdeutscher Rundfunk, to learn how they created a resource to identify insolvency in the private and corporate sector in Germany. So this is going towards the economic impact of COVID-19 in Germany. Please click on the link that we are sharing with you now in the live chat. You will also find the link to get you to the French lab. So the lab session that is going to be with Frédéric Salé and Marie Toulemont from Sud-Est France, who will show how to use data to investigate public health systems. We hope you enjoy the lab sessions we prepared today, and we look forward to seeing you back tomorrow at NIS Data. However, remember that tomorrow we will be starting in the afternoon at 2 p.m. Central European Time to welcome speakers from outside Europe. So have a great rest of the day, everyone.
So now we can start with our English online lab. Hello, Clara, and welcome to NIS Data.
Hello,
Clara,
everybody.
I can see you now. Hello. So Clara Ten is an Italian data journalist and digital journalist trainer. As we know, Italy has been one of the hardest hit countries when the virus reached Europe at the beginning of 2020. And at the peak of the pandemic in Italy, data journalism has proven to be a powerful and a relevant tool, not just to explain the math of the contagion, but also to highlight the people, the stories behind the numbers. For instance, it was also very interesting to notice how local data can anticipate national trends. Clara will look at the coverage around COVID and other aspects like productivity, and will share with us a method to observe and analyze the figures, but always having into account the focus on the human aspects that lie in data. Clara, we're ready for your session.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Hannah, for your introduction, and welcome everybody, and thank you for joining this session. Now I'll share my slides, and hope you can see them. And we can start to delve into the topic. As Anna already said, I'm a data journalist and also a digital journalism trainer, most focused on data. And I was also the former Google News Lab teaching fellow for Italy in 2020. First of all, what does it mean to talk about the human side of data? Maybe it could be something like this, use food, that is really human, I think, and even really nice to build charts like this. This comes from an Instagram account called Data Cuisine, if you wanted to check it. And it's a nice idea, it's an interesting idea, but it's not exactly what I have in mind today for this session. I was thinking more about something like observing objective data. For instance, something that is related to our body, like the blood pressure for a while, to see if we can discover something most related to our way of life. What I mean. For instance, if you have a little bit of high blood pressure, maybe you have to drink less coffee or less wine, or maybe you are a little bit too stressed, or maybe there are it's a genetic feature you have inherited from your parents or someone else in your family. And all these are objective aspects, but we can, asking the right question and using the right approach, even discover something interesting that and most subjective related to our way of life. For instance, maybe it will be interesting to see and to check why we need to drink so much coffee, or why we are so stressed, and if we can do something to change it. And to talk about a little bit clearer about this topic, I would like to bring you back in time with me to a couple of months ago, exactly at the beginning of the the first wave of the COVID-19 pandemic here in Italy. It was March and April of 2020, where in Italy something happened. Exactly, it's that what happened was that data journalism helped to start a debate about what data say and what data can forecast. I picked an example, a really interesting example, published by Eco di Bergamo, which is a local newspaper based in Bergamo, northern Italy, and made by a colleague, a data journalist, a really great data journalist, let me say, with Isaia Vernizzi. And this is the first article of a series that Eco di Bergamo published from the beginning of April, telling about data related to the coronavirus pandemic in this area. And what they discovered was that between March and April 2020, 7,700 people died in this area. They compare this data with some other facts they could have. The first one is that in the same months of the previous 5 years, the average number of deaths was about 1,700. So this means that the number of people deceased increased by 6,000 compared to the average number of the previous 5 years. And also, it's interesting to notice that only 3,000 of these 7,700 people were officially certified as coronavirus victims. And this is the local picture. Now, I want to move to a more broader picture related to all Italy, because 2 weeks later, the first article published by the Eco di Bergamo, Istat, which is the Italian National Statistic Office, published this report, was aimed to estimate the impact of COVID-19 in the most hit areas all around Italy. To do it, they pick a sample made of 1,689 towns all around Italy. Each of these towns has at least has recorded between the time since the 4th of January and the 4th of April 2020, at least 10 deaths. And this number would be equal or higher than the 20% compared to the average number of deaths that these towns recorded between 2015 and 2019. And the general findings of this report were these. If we look at the entire sample, we notice that the number of deaths increased by 102%. We can also see how they affected men and women, and it was at the time wasn't not so clear at the beginning that men were most affected by this illness. And here, going back to a regional view, this is the data related to the number of deaths in Lombardy. Lombardy is northern Italy and is one of the most affected regions by coronavirus. It is still actually, and we can see that here the increasing was higher, quite higher, almost double the the national average, plus 174%. And Bergamo, which is in Lombardy, was, as Eco di Bergamo already said 2 weeks before with their data, was the most affected province in Italy, affected by a great number of dates, to be honest, to be precise. And Cremona, Lodi, Piacenza were all provinces that are close, each one, are in the same situation. So what does this data mean for us? They are showing 2 different aspects. The first is that these data are telling us something about direct and indirect effects of COVID-19. And it means that, first of all, we are talking about contagion and possible effects of contagion, because, as I told before, we are not sure that all these deaths are because of coronavirus. But also, it's indeed they are these data are saying that probably most part of this death are related to the fact that the health system was overwhelmed. So it means that probably some of them couldn't they got coronavirus, but they couldn't have a diagnosis or couldn't have a treatment for it. Other have other kind of illness, chronic illness, for instance, but it was hard to get hospitalization, to get treatment, to get assistance that we normally can have from the health system. And there is also another aspect, and now we come to the human aspect of data. There is an important question that comes from this data. Who were the people that died in this time? And in Italy, in every country in the world that now is facing the coronavirus pandemic, we have this problem. We almost don't know really a lot or almost anything about these people. So it's important in this sense, and I think that between yesterday and today, other colleagues had show really interesting way to face all the issue and the questions related to telling coronavirus with data. And this is in this sense that I think, and I have thought really a lot about how much the human side of data matters. That's why I started thinking in this way, first because in my experience in the past years, I noticed that when I was working with data, I have to care about my spreadsheet, the formulas I need to apply, the maths, the statistics, and so on. I also have to think about the visualization, which is the best chart to talk about this topic, and which are the right color that make it really clear, really nice to see, and so on. And all these are really important aspects, are fundamental aspects, let me say. And I'm really always support, and I will always do, the idea that we need a rigorous method to approach and to handle data. But on the meantime, we need also to consider and to bear in mind, to take in account the empathic side, because data, as the rest of the things we do as journalists, means that we are talking about people and we are talking to people. In this sense, I want to also to show you another example. It's not only a matter of COVID-19, but if you have the opportunity to read this book, Invisible Woman, maybe you already know because it's quite famous, written by the researchers Caroline Criado Perez, you can see how many data biases exist on collecting data related to women. And the same, I think, it's about everyone, every minorities, or everyone is considered as a minority. And these biases are affecting data, and then are affecting all the decisions and the policies that are made relating to this specific target of inside the population. That's why, in my opinion, it's important to find a way to train a method that helps us to balance the accuracy and to balance the empathy we need when you use data to talk about something with our audiences. And so, what I would like to do now is to show you quick the 5 steps we need to go through to use this method, and then to have a little to take some time to try together how to apply it. Talking about the steps, they are 5 and they are similar to the steps you normally have to undertake when you want to build a visualization. The first one is observation. I think really in this to create a right mindset to balance method and empathy, I think that observation is a really important step. Because in this moment, you have to collect data and mostly to ask you, before collecting data, to ask you the right question. The more you ask a question in number and quality, I mean, the best probably are your findings. And so I mean that if you start from a question, I need to understand better how many people can be affected by coronavirus. And then you start adding other questions. They make you able to focus on more details. And having more details, you can create a more clear frame, context to give to your readers and to understand the topic you want to tell them. Secondly, it's time to measure the data you have. So you need to look for them to understand which can be the most trustable sources, or even if you need to pick some, to collect some of this data by yourself. Then it's the third step, it's related to reading, analyzing, and categorizing data. Reading is the first one because obviously sometimes clear data could be really clear and immediately they say it say us something that means that we have find our story, we have find our news, but also it will be it need to use some formulas, use some maths, some statistic to create some index moving from the data you have, or to apply a filter. And in this sense, you can observe all the aspects inside the data and go to the next step, which is finding the stories. Finding the stories, in my opinion, is really connected, strictly linked to the first step, the observation. Because if you train yourself, train your mind to ask the right question when you observe, when you are exploring the area, and to see which kind of data can be useful, can be the most interesting for your work. The same happen with stories. So it's mostly a matter of what I ask to data and what they answer me. In this sense, I'd like to you an interview given in 2019 by Giorgia Lupi, which is an information designer, and she gave an interview on the magazine of the Data Visualization Society, which is really interesting because she focused on the topic of the complexity. broader and attentive, effective observation of data allow us to understand, to have a clear idea about the complexity that the news carry on with itself, and help us also to choose the right way to communicate, to visualize it, and to make it effective and understandable for our audiences, no matter which are our audiences. Last but not least, the final step is visualization, which means, of course, to understand which are the best way to communicate, to transform this data in image, charts, picture that can help our readers, our audiences. I don't want to talk just about readers, to better understand that complexity that we are trying to handle throughout data. I want to now to ask you, to invite you to try to apply a little bit of this method together. I will show you the step and the way I do it, but you can also try by yourself. In this case, I don't want to focus to visualization, but mostly to the first 4 steps. So try to understand which can be a useful approach to create a mindset, a personal mindset that balance method, accuracy, and empathy. And to do this, I choose as a topic the productivity. And I choose it because you know that in macro and microeconomics, this is normally an index, a parameter that is always analyzed, and it's considered really important. Now we are going to work on a small data scale, not big data in this context. And to prepare yourself to it, I want to ask you to pick your agenda. Could be your paper agenda if you're a little bit vintage type like me, or can be even your calendar on your digital calendar. And look, take some minutes, a couple of minutes, to look how many and which job task you have marked down in for each day in the last 3 or 5 days. I put 3 or 5, it's up to you. Choose how many do you want. If you choose the last 3, it will be enough, because we don't need a big amount of of data for now. So if you want to try, I give you some times, and in the meantime, I show as an example my digital agenda. I use both digital and paper one, just to make my mind a little bit more confused in some days at least. And this is some potential example. This is it was the last week of October, and I just marked down some of my usual job tasks, from researching content to publishing, writing pieces, publishing posts. I choose different colors because some of these, as I work as a freelancer, some of these tasks are related to different job, or could be even different type of task that you want to mark down. And also some video call, catch up with former colleagues, and also preparing invoices. That it's also a nice moment in the month. And that's the idea. Now, if you have picked your agenda, paper, or even like this, a paper version of the digital one, next step, it would be to pick even some piece of blank paper and some pen or pencil of different colors. It would be great. If you don't have the possibility to print a page from your digital agenda, or you don't want to highlight, circle things on your paper agenda, just bring a white piece of paper, and you can recreate your agenda like this, putting on the top the name of the weekdays, and here on the side the hours of the day, and just mark down the write down the job task you have done in the last three days. And you could also use a different go straight and use a different color to highlight each of these tasks. When you have done this, we can start observing what our agenda is saying. And this observation, as I told you before, is fundamentally a moment where we ask ourselves some question. And this question can be, for instance, how much or how many, of your job tasks did you complete during each day? How many did you deleted or rephrase or delegated to someone else? Now, if as we don't have so much time, you don't have to pick all these categories. They are just an example. You can pick just two, quite simple. Those are the tasks I completed and those I deleted or just postponed, as you prefer. And picking down your notes or your agenda, you can do something like this. This is another paper copy of my digital calendar, and I do this way. I chose four different colors. The green one to highlight, as in this case, the task I have completed. The purple one to indicate those I needed to move to another day of the week or just to another time during the same day. Then I also use the blue one, I hope you can see it, to highlight that I delegated this task. And here even there is a red one to mark that I couldn't do this call. And this is an idea to highlight the different kind of different categories for each job task. It's also interesting to notice that I put here or here some notes, and normally they are related in my cases to the fact that I needed more time to complete that task. I did them, but I needed more time. Now, after doing this, we can move to the next step. Hope I'm not going too fast. In case, please write it in the chat, and please, if Anna can alert me on that, I can slow down a little bit. And the next step is starting with the analysis. You see that I put measurement analysis, and before was observation measurement, because of course all of these steps are in a continuous line. We don't start and stop them with a real breakpoint. So in the analysis, what we can do, looking at the highlights we have made before, we can see, of course, the job task scheduled for each day, and so I can see which they are, the type. Maybe if I'm a freelancer, probably I have different job tasks related to my different customer, to my different job. I can see the frequencies. I have a daily production of pieces, or I have lots of meetings during the week, or just some days are dedicated to meeting while others are dedicated to writing. Also, which category they belong, in the meaning that I've done them, or I've just delegated or deleted, and so on. How much time I've spent for each one. And even in the analysis, we can also notice which are our feelings about them. They make them satisfied, frustrated. We would like to do more of one task and less of another. It's all aspects that are related to what data is saying to us, but also to find the stories who are interesting for us. And that's why, because from a simple like this, our agenda, everybody of us, I think, has it, can bring some interesting information about the way we work, for instance, or about the way how much we are flexible. So it's normal to me, or it's something that annoying me, the fact that I need to move some of my tasks. The way we manage our time, we are good, or we are always in a rush, anxious because looks like the time is not enough for us, or how much do we trust our colleagues? It's we are used to. Are we used to delegate some job to them, or we prefer to do everything by ourselves, and so on. So, what happened? And this is the visualization part that I don't ask you to do you right now, but if you like to try and maybe wanted to share it on the social network, I think we can use for it also the hashtag NISData. It would be nice to see what you can create and you have seen in your agenda, and even make a discussion in the next day if you like. This is a little visualization that I have created. Please consider that I can't draw, and this is just a sketch, so forgive me, and for everything is not perfect on the aesthetic side of this, was just to give you an idea. So what I have done is this. I just put on the top, as you can see, the name of the weekdays. Then here I put the time of the day on the right, both on the left and right side. And each of these rectangles is equal to 1 hour. Again, forgive me because the rectangles are not really equal, and this is not really accurate if we are talking from the method, but it's just a sketch, as I already said. And I choose, and I wanted to show you, I choose a different color to put in evidence the different kind of task. I choose actually to show what job task I've completed, and I highlight them with the green color. Then I use the purple to sign those I moved to other time along the day or the week. I also use the red to highlight the things that I couldn't do for any reason, and the blue finally to highlight some tasks I've delegated. I also add some notes about the time, and to see it with a little bit closer, here the square brackets means that all these 4 rectangles were dedicated to the same task, and also I put a notice highlighting that I needed 1 hour more compared to what I've planned. Then here, the same on Wednesday, I planned 2 hours, but I needed to add 1 more hour that was added, and that I put on Thursday morning, and I completed my task the day after. And here, other small things that I can show you, the task deleted, those that delegated, and so on. Here it was Friday afternoon, and here I left 2 hour left, while here I have one other task. looking at the general image, what I can see here is a pattern and something that is human, subjective, but it's interesting, and I notice it more looking at the data, is that probably I have to improve, I have to change the way I manage my time, because it happened at least 1, 3, 4 times during the week that I need to add more time to complete my task. So it's interesting, for instance, in this case, to try to understand why, because I'm not good on planning, or because maybe I'm doing really a lot of things and maybe I need to delegate something, or because even it's a matter of balance of the time, and maybe some of these, or just doing this, I can lose some time with no specific reason. So they are all aspects related to time management that can tell me something interesting about the way I work and I manage my time. For instance, I even looking at this data, I can even look for some solutions, some other different options. Maybe I can choose to delegate more. I did it just once during the week. And so maybe it could be a way I can try to see if I can improve my way my way of work, and in general my productivity, and so making something good for my daily routine. Now it's already time to recap, and all this part is to remember us that data always tell us something about human beings, about them, and the fact that we are always talking to them. And so for this reason, we need to train and to improve our awareness about it, and also keeping at the same time a reliable, rigorous method to handle data. I really wanted to stress the fact that empathy and accuracy are not competitors. They are on two fundamental aspects that we have to bear in mind if you want to consider and to apply to make sure they are realized, if you want to use at our best the potential of data, if you want to understand the complexity and being able to communicate, to visualize it to our audiences. I think I've finished, and probably I'm a little bit early. This is my contact. If you want to join me on Twitter or LinkedIn, or just drop a line by email, I'm always happy to share view with the colleagues. I really wanted to thank you for your participation, and hope this little session could have been interesting for you. And again, thank you to the European Journalism Center for inviting me to this session.
Thank you, Clara, for this amazing session. It was very interesting. And I think all of us understood why it's important to go beyond the numbers, beyond the figures, and to focus on the human side of data. In the case of the coronavirus, we saw that we had the statistics, we had percentages, but behind that, we could highlight some deficiencies of the health system. Also, we could highlight some social issues, and that's why we organized this session with Clara to help us understand not just why it's important, but also how to do it. And Clara, we have here a question that I want to share with you from Avinaya. And the question is, do you have any kind of visualization tools that you like? Maybe you can list a couple of them.
Okay, yeah, sure. Well, I can say the first one that comes to my mind is Flourish. I've used it quite a lot while I was working for Google, because Flourish is was created by Kiln, which is a company based in the Netherlands, and which is also partner with the Google News Lab, and I found it really, I think it is the heaven of data journalists, because you can use it for simple charts, but they also have some template were really that make you in a quite easy way to reach the wow effect. That sometimes it's useful to catch the attention of the audience. And another one for visualization, of course, I think that infogram, it's a trustable, also a trustable tool to use, quite similar even in the way you use it to flourish.
We have a similar question from Jan, and is, which instruments do you use instead of Google Fusion tables?
Okay, Google Fusion tables were retired at the end of 2019, if I remember well. And well, actually, the other good tool that you can use inside the Google area I'm meaning is the My Maps, which are the maps you can personalize, you can add some points, you use the level. If I'm not wrong, for now you can create till 10 levels, and it's quite good tool that more or less give you the same option that Google Fusion Table did.
Thank you, Clara. And now we have a question from Antonio. He says, good morning, Clara. Do you think that the Italian institute which provide official data like ESTAD, Banca d'Italia, etc., publish an exhaustive and updated data?
Ooh, great question. Well, as you probably know, even recently we had, there is a public call that answer to collect and to open, or better to open, because they are already collecting, at least I hope, more data about COVID-19. So it means that as in other countries, we need more open data. I think that Istat and Banca d'Italia work quite well, even considering that, as you probably know, statisticians need sometimes to collect, verify, and then publish data. So it's quite normal that if you go looking for some data about a specific topic, maybe you find data published in 2019, but it's normal compared to the fact that they have to follow specific steps to ensure that the data they are publishing are well verified and are clear. It's important also, and could be another open discussion, the point that the way we collect data, as I told before, talking about invisible women or data related to minorities, or right now the data that come from each region of Italy about COVID. It's crazy that for a long time, and still now, I suspect each region is giving us different data, collecting in at least a little different data way. Sorry, and this means that in Piedmont I'm reading a data collected in a way. In Lombardy there is another one. In Rome another one, and so it's crazy because it's impossible to get a true picture of what is going on.
Thank you, Clara. And then we have a second question from Abhinaya, and is if you have any interesting examples of info visualization that you like.
Ooh, well, there are a lot. Let me think. Well, for instance, I think that you can find something nice if you have a look on the blog and the Twitter account of Flourish that collect not only the example they made to show us how to use the tool, but also they collect at least once per year things made by the other user of Flourish. There is another one, Change Tools. Now I was thinking about Tableau, which is it comes from it was made a few years ago. It was about the Titanic, and it was a nice visualization that show how many people for each class from first to third class and the crew died or survived during the drowning of Titanic. And it was really interesting because you get, even in that case, the objective aspects, how many between women, men, between the different class of voyagers, but also you can see that the difference, for instance, people who traveled in third class died more than those that were in the first class. And in this way, you can see immediately objective number and social aspect, human aspects.
Clara, thank you very much. And now we have a really challenging question from Lorenzo. And then the question is, do you think Italian news agencies are doing a good use of data journalism? Is there more potential that can be unlocked?
Well, I think that for the second one, the answer is yes, sure. I have to say that during the first wave of pandemic, I noticed that we have had really good works in this topic, like that made by Isaiah Invernizzi, but also I appreciated the charts made by Il Sole 24 Ore, which create an opposite session dedicated to data. As I know, the Italian community of data journalists is quite small compared to other countries, and so I think, but I also know that many people that are working in this field are really good, are really passionate, are really interested, for instance, on the topic of open data, because the most of this job is also finding data. If we don't have data, it's really hard to be good at creating visualization or creating interesting news focus on specific topic using the data. So we can improve, and I hope that in the next year, so we can do more and more and better.
Clara, thank you very much. I also wanted to highlight two sources that you included in your presentation. The first one is Data Cuisine. We share the link in the chat. So feel free to explore this website, also their social media, because they have really interesting examples. And also, we have a question here, Clara, and she asked if you can share the examples that you gave just a couple of minutes ago in the chat, like very quickly, maybe
sure.
one of them. Yes, thank you very much, Clara.
I'll do
I
soon.
think it's time. Sorry, Clara?
I'll do soon. Yeah.
I think it's time, guys, to wrap up our day. Thank you very much for joining us. Thank you very much for the participation, your questions, your comments. And remember that we have our last day of the summit on data tomorrow. But remember, tomorrow we are going to meet at 2 p.m. Central European Time. So have a nice rest of the day and see you tomorrow.